How did Homo sapiens adapt to having such costly brains? The best way to describe it is an orchestra of biological triggers that led to several evolutionary adaptations. There is no one single hypothesis that can explain it all, but rather it seems that the answer lies within several synergistic evolutionary pathways that led us here. Actually, it is still not conclusive and exactly clear when and how humans acquired larger brains than other primates during evolution. But I'll attempt to explain all credible hypotheses and rationales that scientists have come up with over the years to explain this perplexing phenomenon. The brain is perhaps the most energetically expensive organ one can find in vertebrate bodies. The brain of a modern human is about triple the size of its closest living genetic relative, the chimpanzee, meaning that it also requires considerably more energy. Despite this, overall energy consumption rates in both species, when both are resting and motionless, are similar, showing us that somehow humans adapted to meet the energetic requisites of having larger brains. So how did we adapt? In 1995, Leslie Aiello and Peter Wheeler proposed an answer to this question, and they called it the expensive tissue hypothesis. The hypothesis suggests that a reduction of the gut in anthropoid primates offset the energy expenditure needed for larger brains. The gut requires quite a lot of energy and is distinctly small relative to our body size. The development of large brains in members of the Hominidae family may have therefore started to occur gradually, coinciding with dietary changes that consisted of more protein and cooked food. The figure shown here shows both the expected and observed organ mass for a human weighing 65 kilos, based on equations applied for other primate species. This clearly illustrates how, compared to other primates, humans have evolved a much larger brain than would have been expected for a primate species of such a given body mass. The chart also shows how there is an implied trade-off between brain organ mass and gut organ mass. So although the expensive tissue hypothesis quickly became widespread in paleoanthropology, certain studies refuted the hypothesis. A study conducted by Anna Navarrete from the University of Zurich found no correlation between the relative size of a mammal's brain and its other organs, after dissecting and looking at brains and guts for over 100 mammal species. So to this, Aiello and Wheeler rebutted that their hypothesis was solely focused on human brains, and it was never intended as a one-size-fits-all across other mammalian species. The paper they wrote also mentioned that other strategies could have been possible alongside a reduction in the size of the gut, some of which I will also be explaining. In the study by Anna Navarrete, not only was there no general correlation between brain size and the size of other organs, but interestingly enough, the study proved quite the opposite of what Aiello and Wheeler suggested. Of the 100 mammal species that were considered, 23 were primates. And if one had to look at the primates separately, the group which you would think is the most intuitive for humans, there was actually a positive correlation between guts and brains, meaning that primate species with big brains also often had big guts. So if the trade-off between guts and brains may not have been the answer, something else must have been. Instead, trade-offs with less energetically demanding yet widespread tissues, such as fat stores, are to be considered. Adipose deposits allow animals to survive at times when food is scarce, acting as a physiological mechanism to ease food deprivation. Meanwhile, large brains serve as a cognitive mechanism to ease starvation, so larger brains may have therefore been an assisting buffer to counteract starvation. The stabilized energy supply through the avoidance of starvation, the aforementioned improved diet quality through more protein and cooked foods, and energy subsidies formed part of one evolutionary pathway that led to acquiring larger brains relative to our body size. When describing energy subsidies, it essentially refers to any means used which would save up energy. So for example, cooperative breeding, which is where offspring receive care from not only their parents, but also from additional group members. These three factors allowed for an increase in energy input. The other evolutionary pathway is a decrease in energy expenditure on other functions, such as locomotion through efficient bipedalism, or slower or reduced growth rates and reproduction rates through the evolution of slow life histories. So in summary, the positive relationship between a species' basal metabolic rate, which we call the BMR, and increased brain size may indicate that a stable, intensified energy uptake is to some extent responsible for larger brains, whilst a change in energy allocation is another potential pathway. And if you thought that those were enough of an explanation, there's actually more. So the cognitive buffer hypothesis assumes that a larger brain allows for adaptable behavior through intellectual cognition, like learning and being innovative. Although this may be difficult to prove, studies and observations have shown that the more innovative a species is, the more likely it is to have a larger sized brain. Studies designed to test this hypothesis included one that was conducted by Richard Byrne and Nadia Korp that considered behavioral patterns that are highly exhibitive of adaptive traits in relation to the size of the neocortex in several species. Such adaptive behavior included, for example, wheat and potato washing shown by Japanese macaques. So given that large brains have been found to have more neurons, having a higher cognitive capacity to collect, store, and integrate information may help to ease how energetically taxing larger brains are. This has been found to promote species survival rates in the wild, as animals face challenges such as changing environments, for which they may need to develop potentially unconventional or adaptable countermeasures. So these may, for example, include tracking resource vegetation and variations in such, managing to consume hard-to-eat foods, exploiting new ecological niches, avoiding unusual predators, as well as congregating intel from other members of the population. To further prove the payoff of having larger brains, a study conducted by Diener et al. Also noted the correlation between large brains and longevity, essentially meaning that mortality rates would also be on the decline. In fact, encephalization, which is an increase in brain or neocortex size, seemed to occur most rapidly during challenging times of severe climate changes, which allowed for humans at that time to interact better with each other, as well as their surroundings, which ensured the species' survival. Greater fitness benefits can sometimes be acquired through long life histories, as priority is given to adult survival and not current breeding. This ultimately means that factors such as larger brains, which allow for a greater chance of survival, will be chosen in natural selection and adaptation evolution of species. So species with longer life history patterns, such as modern humans, have a higher probability of being exposed to unfavorable conditions. And so the payoff from evolving energetically costly brains will be even higher for them. So slow or long life histories basically describe those species that have slower growth, lower reproductive output, long gestation times, maturity at a later age, as well as higher longevities, larger body sizes, and lower population growth rates. I dearly hope that you're feeling more enlightened rather than confused at this point as to how we managed to adapt to having such an energetically expensive organ. If you'd like to look into the studies which I mentioned, they will be listed down below. Thank you.